Okay, so here we are on your budget sheet. This one might take a little bit of time to complete, but you will see that because you filled in your category sheet, all of your categories, which are your expenses, are in this column here in column D. Those will automatically update. That's why you want to get as many of your expenses filled in right from the get-go so that you can budget accordingly. Let's go up to the daisy in the corner, and again, we're only going to fill in the light blue cells, and all of the cells that are orange will automatically turn to cream color once they are filled in. You'll see that this is a large table and all the totals are at the bottom. This automatically turns red when those expenses aren't filled in, but if you had more expenses and if you filled in all 50 expenses, this entire table would be used. Next thing in your daisy, we're going to set up the months. So the months are automatically set up based on the months in your expense overview sheet. If we go down to the bottom here, the expense overview sheet, these months in the first set of rows here, these ones you want to fill in, and that will change the months for all of the ones below as well as on other sheets. So if January isn't the start of your year, but say February is, you can just change this to February 1st, and then you will change the next ones going forward, and you'll see that if we go back to our budget here, those have automatically changed. That's why you want to set up your months first, but we're going to go and change those back just for the purposes of this. The next step is to enter a cap number. Your caps are mostly going to be for your fixed expenses. For example, if you're paying $1,800 in rent every month and it doesn't change, it stays the same, you can put your cap of $1,800 there, and then once we allocate a percentage to it, that percentage will go toward rent up until the $1,800, and then the rest of it will become your profit. If you have that for your insurance, let's say it's $150 a month, you can also do this for any expenses that you know you want to keep under a certain budget. So let's say you don't want to pay any more than $5,000 in wages, then you can add your cap there. Maybe you have a few different programs or sources that you use for your marketing. If those are fixed amounts every month, you can add those all together and put a cap on that. Let's say that's $200. Same goes for your subscriptions. So maybe that's $300. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to fill in our percentages. So that's everything in this C column that is beside our expenses. For our taxes, what we want to do, since in Manitoba, our taxes are 12%, we have 5% GST and 7% PST that we collect. Wherever you are, that number might be different. I personally like to put aside a little bit more than what our set amount is. This is to have a good idea of what you have collected, since that is not money that you really want to spend. So I do suggest that you put that money into a separate account to accumulate so that you have that available when you need to pay it. For these purposes, I'm going to do 12.5% because, again, I like to put away a little bit more than what was actually collected. With these percentages, you're going to want to play around with it a little bit. You know best what your average income is every month. So you can do a little bit of math, play around with the numbers, type some numbers in, and adjust them as you need to based on what you think you need. Let's move on to the next step. Fill in the light blue cell in E7 with the amount deposited from last month of last year. For this one here, our first month, which in this case is January, we're going to insert what we made last month. And that's not our gross sales or our net sales, but this is what was actually deposited into our account. From there, let's say we did $22,647.84. So you'll see that all of our budgets are now showing up here, and this is what we have left to allocate. For our taxes, 12.5%, this is our budget, and then you can put in what the actual amount of tax collected was. So in this case, let's just put aside the exact same amount, and now we don't have any overflow. Now that we can kind of see what this amount is here, we know what our average is. So you want to make sure that if you're usually making a little bit less than this, then maybe make your percentages a little bit higher. Or if you're usually making a little bit more than that, you can still keep them a little bit higher or keep them in between depending on how much savings and profits you want. So let's see, if we make 20% of our deposited money, that is enough to cover our rent, and then we'll probably have some extra money left over as well. Let's test some numbers here. Now, after putting in a few numbers, I see that I'm already over 100% here. So let's do some adjusting. If I do 10% of that, I still make my rent. So that gives me 10% more to work with. So let's start doing that a little bit here. Let's do 2%. That's enough. Let's say my phone is $80 a month. We know that, so we can add that cap. My internet is $120 a month, so we can add that cap. Do 1% there. I added these expenses on the bottom here just so I can give you an example. When you are keeping track of your banking, you'll want to keep track of every action that is happening in your bank account. And a lot of that's going to be a lot of like transfers from different accounts, paying off your credit card, stuff like that. Those transfers are not expenses that you want to be budgeting for. So for anything that you don't actually want to budget for, you just want to put a 0% beside those. Like your transfers, gaining any interest in your accounts, those things you don't need to budget for. So you'll put the 0% beside that. And then let's say we want another, that's not enough. So let's do 2% there. Perfect. So this looks okay too. We've got 0.5% left at the top here. That gives us over $2,600 remaining for the month in the budget. So we can allocate that to other places if we want to, or we can stick strictly within our budget and what is allocated here so that we have that as our profit. Again, that doesn't mean that you have to spend all of this money that is allocated here, but it helps us to just have a good idea of where that money is going. So we did fill in the tax amount here in our first month, but everything else, because the cells are all orange, those will automatically be input for you based on what you put into your banking sheet. So we can come back to this sheet after we have gone through our banking, and you'll see how this works. Also, any of the amount that is in the overflow here will be moved over to the next month, which will make your budgets even higher. But again, you still probably don't want to spend your entire budget because you want to have a profit. The only things that won't have the overflow included in them are any of your amounts with caps. So if you don't want to necessarily see a lot of the overflow, you can absolutely add caps to any of the other expenses as well. At the bottom of this table, you'll see for each month, you have your total allotted budget, the total amount spent, and then any overflow will be in the bottom corner of each month. And then all of your yearly will be on the far right side. On the bottom, you have an overview of what's deposited, what's in your budget, and what's spent every month, and then your profit. So then you can also see your yearly at the bottom. We'll come back to this after we fill in our banking spreadsheet. So we are back on our budget sheet after we have filled out some banking information. Based on the income that we had input into our banking sheet, this is the amount that we had deposited in January, so that becomes our February budget. This information here will automatically update based on what our percentages are and our caps. So you'll see that even though we deposited a little little less than what we had the month before, we still were able to make all of our caps for the most part, except for maybe our wages, but maybe we just didn't want to spend more than $5,000 in our wages, so we come under budget a little bit with that. But we do still have some money remaining from what was deposited the month before, so if we wanted to or needed to, we could always use that for some wiggle room. And you'll see that in the month before, based on what we had input into our banking sheet, the rent was automatically updated and input in there, so we see we have no overflow with that. And we had spent some money on inventory, so that was automatically put into our budget sheet here, and this is what we still had remaining. And of course, any other expenses that we put into our banking would all show up under here, and we would see how much budget we have, how much we have already spent, and how much overflow or how much we still have remaining to spend for that month. And once we are finished the month, hopefully we still have a little bit money left here, and that is our profit.